Hi everyone, it's Donna and I'm in my studio again, and we're going to do a project based on Matthew chapter 10 that would be found in the Sunday Mass readings tomorrow. So stay tuned for that part of it, but I really wanted to share with you one of the reasons why I chose this art project, and it has a background story because I used to go visit my grandparents that moved to Southern Illinois when I was in high school, and I got to go for like a month. I loved going. It was living in the country, not a lot of TV stations or things to do except explore. So for me, it was a lot of fun, and I loved my grandparents, of course. One of the things that my grandfather did was that he loved the outdoors. He was hunting. He had beagles, like hunting dogs, all kinds of things. But he also loved birds. So I think that I got a love of birds from him, and I'm sure that my brother would say the same thing because he tried to do the same things. My grandfather had a parakeet that had a cage in the house, but he used to put it on his shoulder and walk around and let it sit on his finger and all kinds of things. It was really rather cool. But the birds outside, he made a bird house with a bird feeder, and it was called the feed store, so it even had like a front porch. It looked like an 1800s feed store or something, and we would watch the birds. So not only would the squirrels sometimes get up there and eat the food, that feed store was on a pole, so today's birdhouse is on a pole. But today's subject was sparrows, so I did a lot of research, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we look at the pictures that we're doing today and talking about how we are worth much more than many sparrows, not just two. So you can see today's project is for the birds, as I was talking about in my introduction. So today's scripture that we're talking about today from Matthew chapter 10 fits together with some of the other scriptures that we talked about on Wednesday for The Word is Live. Sing to the Lord, praise the Lord is in the first reading for tomorrow's Mass. He has rescued us, the Psalm, Lord, by your great love, answer me. All of these concepts are great things to meditate on, but for today's project, to discuss this story, I really focused on the fact that we are worth much more than many sparrows. And in the reading, Jesus is saying, are not two sparrows sold for a small coin, yet not one of them falls to the ground without your Father's knowledge. Even all the hairs of your head are counted, so do not be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. And those sparrows may not seem like very important birds to you. They might be one of the lowliest birds, and when I was researching house sparrows, they are often thought of as pretty annoying, because what they will do is they'll try to nest on your house in crevices, under the eaves of buildings. I have robins that have been doing that this spring. So every year they try to make nests on any of our light sconces that are on the outside of the house. We can find that sometimes birds can be pretty annoying. We have had birds with, when they have nests and there's eggs in the nest, they will actually fly and try to scare people away so that they could protect their eggs. So all of these concepts are actually things that we might encounter every day. But if you looked at these cute little house sparrows, I printed a couple pictures that I found on the internet because I wanted to get an idea of their shape and what they looked like. And when I found out about them, I also looked at what kind of house would they want to nest in if you built a birdhouse, because I like birdhouses. And I have made them before, even as gifts, because my husband does woodworking also. And then I painted them. So we have different ways that we can look at birds. And when I started to look at this bird, I took my black Sharpie and tried to look at what do these shapes look like on here. how would the bird be shaped? So if you were to draw the bird, would it be an oval and then a head on the top? And where would its shoulder or wings be tucked in? How would you draw them? And this one had great feet, so I thought about using this one because you could see those toes and even the nails in this picture. It's a really good picture as it sat on that piece of wood, and the beak. So I challenge you to go outside as you look at birds and do quick nature sketches. I found an artist who does teach. He has some things on YouTube. His name is John Muir Laws, and he's done a couple of books. So I found that he had this PDF. So if you wanted to, you could go to his website, and in one of his blogs, he explained how he was drawing this. I think this was a chickadee, but how he would figure it out. And I thought it was interesting that he used the time on a clock to help explain where the line of the bird was. So I was watching a little bit of him this morning, and he talked about how maybe you should do this line, like on the outside, if this was the line of the bird, and then make its head. So instead of trying to do these two circles like he had here, it might be better to draw that line and then put the bird's head on. And where is its beak, and how is it tilting its head, and where is that shoulder for the wings going to be? And different birds are shaped differently. So these house sparrows, I kind of liked the positioning that they were in. So I tried to use those in my drawing. So I thought I'd show that to you because you might think that it's really easy or too hard to even try to come up with your own drawings. So what I did was I started practicing like what size, because I looked at how big it would need to be for what is the hole gotta be if a sparrow was going to nest in here. And this is a 2-inch circle in diameter. So it would need to be that big, like literal. And the house had to be 9 to 12 inches tall, and it could only be 4 by 4 square for that base. So it could only be like this big inside. It wanted it to be small. Now you could see when I was drawing with my ruler, I didn't even draw it right because this was 4 inches. So my center was off for my peak. And I thought, if I do this, I'm not going to have any room to put my words or my birds on there, and that wouldn't work. So then I tried again, and I was drawing my birds on one side of the page, and I was doing landscape, and I drew another house. And I thought this one would be, pretty good. It wouldn't be bad for this shape. And then I could put birds on the right side of the paper and do a landscape. But I wasn't totally happy, and I did use this type of drawing for the basis of the one that I did on the coloring page. But I thought about teaching perspective and the lines and looking at how they're not always parallel when you're drawing it, because your perspective might be looking down or underneath or from above. And then I decided that was too much, because really what I wanted to focus on was the sparrows, because that's what the story's about, that were worth so much more. So what I did was I used my light pad, which I just have like a Crayola light pad that is my grandson's, but it's here in the house, so I use it quite often, or I use a window to trace. So I looked at my pictures, and then I tried to trace and come up with what would my design be, like where would I put the words, how could I fit this in? And I wasn't totally happy still. So I liked the fact that the birds were sort of this way, but I wanted the house to be smaller. And then I came up with this design. So I like took this one and went like, if I put this on the landscape and I put the birds on the other side of the paper, how could I fit those in and how would it look? So now the birdhouse is far away. They are the focus, so they're larger and closer to you, and the birdhouse is a little farther set back. And I'll talk a little bit more about why I still wanted the birdhouse. So I looked at my examples, and you can tell that in my drawing, I'll show you the first one that I did where I erased all my pencil lines after I used my black fine point Sharpie to do this. I did use these birds as my example, and you could see how I positioned them. This is supposed to be this one. And as I was drawing, I realized that it was really going to be impossible for me to give you all of this detail in a coloring page. And would you be able to color this perfectly? So you'll see on my coloring page, it's not perfect. And my drawing is not perfect. But I kind of wanted to give you that impression that there are layers of feathers here, and that it sort of went down like a line. It was divided, those feathers, from one side to the other, and give you a tail feather and the impression of the feet. So as an artist, sometimes we back off a little bit on those details to give you more of an impression of the bird than just what you could do maybe in a picture. So if I was going to do this, I would blow it up, because you can see that this almost even looks a little bigger than the actual one, but it is traced. That I would probably blow it up and do it in a finer detail where I would have more opportunity to fit in all of those things, all of those lines and the light inside there. I would be more particular about it. But since we're not able to do that, I wanted to show you that I drew this many times. And I suggest that if you want to learn more how to draw things, that's what you do. Keep practicing. So these are leaves that I draw all the time, I guess. I kind of like these leaves, and I saw some pictures online that I thought, well, that's a kind of branch that maybe I want to have to fill in the picture. I didn't want to put big leaves around them and cover up the birds or distract from the birds. So we have our house, and I did put a cross on it, and I imagined that was more like the weather vane you might see on the top of a barn that would tell you, which way the wind is blowing or whatever, but that wrought iron kind of look, so you could tell that my cross in my coloring picture looks a little more silver, because I used black and white to make it. And I wanted to put some flowers in. I didn't want to put ivy growing up, but because I don't know if you realize that usually birdhouses are nestled into the trees or hanging from a tree, but they're not always, surrounded in flowers when they're in nature. So, the sparrows, I guess, wanted to be a certain number of feet off the ground and for the perfect nesting space. And this is partly for their protection from predators. So they don't want you to be able to get to their birdhouse. So we're seeing the birdhouse from far away in this picture with a couple branches and two of our house sparrows. I did put the words in, and I tried to make them look different and interesting as I was doing my worksheet, the one that I started from. I have to tell you that I did the words numerous times, I guess, or moved them a little bit as I copied them, because I thought this one had great space, but I started to run out of room. So I tried to fix that on my final copy. So this was the first pencil, or the second pencil drawing of this all together. And you can see I totally wrinkled my paper. This is copy paper. When I was trying to erase all of the pencil, because I had a lot of pencil and a lot of words and trying to fit things in. So that gives you kind of the background for what we're doing today. And this was our example. Here is the final copy that I did in black. So you could see I kind of fixed the sparrows word. I added some curly cues into the spaces, like tendrils of vines or branches that would be beginning on a tree. And then I did send it to you or post it on Facebook in blue, only because I wanted you to get an idea of what this would look like, very light, and so that you would have the opportunity to practice drawing by following along with my drawing. So you could go over these lines, and it would be great practice to look at how could you make these feathers. They're sort of laying on top of each other to practice all of those little hooks, and they're almost like a U, curlicues of things that would help you, or even for the toe. And this is like a, oops, this is like a nail right there. How would you shape your leaves to learn to draw in squiggles or S's in order to make a shape? And then these letters to color those in. Now, if you use your black Crayola marker and then you try to fill these letters in, it will smear and you'll get black in whatever color that you put in those letters. So I wouldn't recommend that to you to do. I also, when I did this picture, you may not have all of the lines that are drawn in here. I added them in, and I'll show you what I did to color those in and get things started. So as you can see, here's my clipboard that I used to color while I watched television last night, and my print on cardstock. You can see that I made the birdhouse look shadowed. I used numerous colors. I did only use my Crayola pencils, but I used brown, black, and orange because I wanted to give it more of a painterly look. And I really do like line and wash, like line and watercolor. So even if I do something in colored pencil or paint, I have a tendency to want to give it more definition with some kind of a marker. So I have like professional markers, not just fine point Sharpies that I use. But I wanted you to see that in my picture, like here, there were only a couple of lines and I just added some so you could go over the blue ones that I did. You can see that I added more cracks in the wood or squiggles as because I wanted it to show that the wood has wood grain, and you could do that as much as you like. And you could wait to do that after you do some of your colored pencil work. But what I did was when I had these lines, and the reason why I gave you some, if you didn't want to do the, if you didn't want to show the black Sharpie and make it a black line, you could leave it blue just like in our other ones. But you could make this one of those veins in the wood and color it darker. The way that I got this was I might have started with a little bit of, I'm going to shade, you know, some underneath the eave. I want to make sure that I remember that that is in a shadow. So I do some, and since you're doing wood grain, you don't have to worry so much about doing circles for shading. In these areas, we are actually trying to give the impression that it's wood, so going up and down and not being perfect with how you are coloring is actually going to work better, because if you look at the grain in wood, it is not straight lines, it's not perfect. Really nothing in nature is a straight line or a perfect line. So you can see in this one that I did that. Well, then I thought with the brown it wasn't quite dark enough or shadowed enough, so then I'm going to put a little bit of shadow around the edges, and maybe this one, this vein is going to look a little darker. And so I'm building all of my colors, and I thought really the black is going to give me that sun shadow, and I wanted it to look like this line, echoing, imitating this, so that if the light was coming down, you would see that shadow. And of course, light is not perfect. There could be other things in the way. So I gave this my light accent to make it more interesting. And now in this position, I'm doing more of like loopy kind of circles, so that my shadow is more of a shadow instead of those lines that you would find in the wood grain. So when I went to do this shadow and make this a little bit darker, I made sure that I filled that in, but I did it in a very light fashion, and then did those like loopy kind of circles as I'm coloring instead of lines. So you can see that that happened there, and you can even see that on the top, the roof, I colored in with brown, but I went over it more than once. So as I put in the orange to give it more interest and color definition, because I have to tell you that it wasn't orange, you know, the house that I looked at, but I wanted to make this look warm and interesting. So I put a little orange in, and then when I went back to color over it and make it brown, I have that hint of orange, and you can still see that some of the white is coming through. So when I color this now, I'm trying to like fill it in. The light is still coming through a little bit, but now it looks not so much orange, but more like a maple wood, an orangier wood, or the sunlight is hitting it. And you can see that as I keep going, it gets it gets darker, and it does get more of a texture. Now I just realized again that my board is textured because I'm on a watercolor board, so I'm going to switch that out. Now I'm using the back of a sketch pad to color with, but if you can see this up close, as I was coloring, I have line texture going this way because the watercolor paper has a texture that is going horizontal, like landscape on the paper. So even the cardboard had it, and I forgot that that was not going to work. So it's one of the reasons why I will definitely do this, and sometimes when I color I have paper underneath because it helps make this softer, not as hard when you're coloring, but you want to make sure that there aren't any papers folded or the edge. Like if you were coloring on more than one paper, you might get that edge in your that crease in your coloring. So you wouldn't want to do that. So there's a watch out for that kind of thing happening. And then I wanted to show that there were some branches or maybe twigs in here, and when I colored with the black, I found that even if I went over it a couple of times, I would still kind of not get a very deep look. So I went back to my Crayola black marker so that I could get that really deep color of like that it's going back further in there and how dark it might be. So like I said, that's why I do numerous mediums, because I want to get that impression and I want it to disappear. I said that for the cross I did a combination. I just put some black on here, and I tried to do that where you make a shadow on the bottom more and then you go to the sides, and you could even see the circles that I did on the circle in black, and then I went over that with white to smooth it out and make it look more gray. So I would recommend going around the outsides of it to give it depth. You know, when you if you want to use your Sharpie to fine point draw around that and give it that impression, I would recommend that also. For the leaves, what I did was I wanted to show you that you could take your Sharpie after you draw around your Sharpie, you could, with your Sharpie, you could make more than one line, and you could make those lines to create depth or interest there. So I was showing you that in some of these, and I put it on a couple of other ones because I felt like these were part of a focus as we were coloring, but then I didn't do it on the ones that were in the bottom of the page. I just made those two-dimensional with color. So I was going to show you that what I did was that I just made my dark green the shadow or where I felt like the leaf was bent, so it seems like there's a dip right here. So I put green in the dip, and I didn't necessarily want lines, so I'm going over that way. And then all I did, I'm gonna take out my good picture from the clipboard so I can just use my clipboard to color on because I don't want to mess up my picture. So then I took the lighter green and I went over it. I colored in the parts that would be lighter or catching the sun, so the way the leaf was turned, and then went over the dark green to get those colors to totally blend together. So I went over it lightly and gave myself sort of a plan with all of my dark green. Where do I want my shadows to be? How would this leaf look? And I thought this leaf, even though it looks like it was standing up, I felt like this was leaning down and this was facing up, so it would probably catch more light. And then at the base, there would be a little shadow there. On this one, you would find a shadow here because this one is like scooping. So there would be a little shadow there and a little shadow here. And all I did that with the darker green and then put the lighter green on so that you would get the impression of the shape of the leaf. Otherwise, it's kind of flat. And you could see like some of the center lines that I gave you for these leaves to have that vein in the leaf. I did shape them to give you a hint about which side was turned up and which side wasn't. So where you could practice your blending techniques. And then as you color over them 2 or 3 times, which sounds crazy probably, you would then get this really smooth color. If you look at, because I did do mine on cardstock, I have a little more forgiveness. There's more tooth or texture to the paper than there is to copy paper, or it might be different. But you can see that this now has sort of a shine to it. It's reflective, and that's called burnishing. So I went over this enough times that it is now like shiny. So that wax has been smoothed out, like if you were going to wax your car or something. It now has a beautiful shine. And that even happened with the 2 colors that I used for the flowers. So they're purple and blue. So I made the center purple. I also did show you in my coloring page that I put, and I do this all the time, it just makes things more interesting. I made shadows and dark spots for you to color. But if you notice on my coloring page, I didn't do this for you in yours so that you could practice giving your petals little veins, because most flower petals have little veins, and you could make them long veins depending on the flower, so that you could practice and keep in mind like the dimensions, your perspective. So this flower is sort of facing up in that way, so these petals are not showing like this one, long petals, because this is where the flowers turn toward you, and this is on the other side, so you don't see the whole petal. So if you are going to practice making your petals, you would do that. And you could even go back over this and finish that flower if you wanted. And I left mine empty and colored it the other way, as if you were only seeing this part and these petals, you couldn't see them. So keep that in mind for your perspective. I will show you a little bit about the coloring that was on the birds. It had a little bit of what you might say is gray, orange. You might even say that there's a little bit of a blue-gray, which in mixing colors, we don't always use black because gray is actually or even black, a compilation of colors. You would mix colors differently. But for the purpose of this, we definitely used black. And I tried to show you like the highlight on the top of the beak here. So it's gray, but it's not colored in with the Sharpie. I took my Sharpie and colored the eye. It was also harder to see around the eye, so there's like a little white spot there. But unless you really zoomed in, you wouldn't be able to get a good impression of the eye and how it might have that white line around it. And unless I used a white marker to highlight or something, I wouldn't be able to do it in this kind of drawing because it's pretty simple. So here we have spots of color, and he had sort of like, they had white collars around their neck, depending on the bird, how deep the colors were changed. So you could do whichever one you like, but I wanted to just show you that I did use the orange and the brown and the black to make these shadows. So if I was doing this bird here, I would be putting brown on it, yes, even in some of these whiter parts, because that white wasn't really white like our paper. And I wanted, and its belly shadow sort of here on the bottom looked a little more brown, but I would use black under his chin. This one had sort of like, I don't know what I want to call it, like a tie. I don't know, he had something under his chin. So I shadowed to give depth to his head, and I went around these lines and even his beak and left a light line where the sun might be hitting it on the top. And I didn't think that that was actually as light as or as dark as I would like it. So then I went back with my Sharpie to do the eye, and we gave him a little shadow underneath here. So you could see that all you want to do is start somewhere, give him some highlights, on his head, because he was sort of an orangey and yellow brown, and then just go over the orange with a little brown, and it won't look so bright, so orange. So if you could, which I had a hard time doing with these pencils and everything, you could put in those dark stripes that you would see here, and we just made ours really, really simple. So you could put a black line in each of these feathers, but don't fill in the whole thing, because you saw that there were some light edges around those feathers. So the only thing that I noticed that I did skip in the coloring page as we are looking at this, and I realized I signed it. So you could squiggle that out with your Sharpie if you'd like, but we didn't put in the scripture, which is Matthew 10:26-33. And you could put that wherever you like and however you like. And the other thing that I was going to do for mine today was to put one thing that I always want to remember, and sometimes I need to remind myself all the time, and it was in the scripture: do not be afraid. So I put, do not be afraid, on the house that has the cross on top of it. And I was thinking about the birdhouse, a home for the sparrows, that we have a house that we can go to. We have a church. We have a home. We have the Father's house and eternal life. all of those images is that he has a place for us, and we don't need to be afraid. So I hope you enjoy today's project, and you learned a little bit about making some of those shadows, and you enjoy coloring. God bless you all, and peace be with you.